Today on the AirDnD podcast, I'm really excited to have a friend of mine with me, Mr. Andrew Voorhees. He's a very chill dude. Honestly, I would say he's one of our more quieter players, but I would say he's, over the course of the past few months, has definitely surprised me to the amount of heart and energy that he's like brought to the table. And so originally I thought, I was like, man, Andrew's kind of the reserved guy. And then one day he just starts playing the game like this crazy, emotionally invested character. So I wanted to officially welcome you on the podcast and thank you for coming today.
Yeah, it's been awesome to try and figure out how to, get into role play, because I've never done anything like theater or anything.
Yeah.
I did do a bit of like choir, but you don't really get into a character at all with that. So it's like I've never had the chance to try and get into a character that wasn't just like me messing around with my siblings to be weird kind of thing. It's really cool to be able to, build a character from the ground up and then figure out how you want him to be.
Yeah.
Yeah,
today I really wanted to talk about D&D more from the player side of things, what it's like to come out of your shell at the table, kind of why roleplay is weird, but also weirdly powerful, and what happens when you have those moments where your character arc hits you in the feels. Or as, one of my favorite quotes this year from the Pokemon detective movie that came out with Ryan Reynolds is, when a moment hits you in the jellies. When you first started, was it at my table, or you had any experience before?
Mm-hmm. I had done a one shot before I did our like sessions with you and Reggie. It was supposed to be just like a normal one shot or whatever. And Sean Dempsey was the one who was DMing. Yeah, so it was a while ago. We got past the first encounter, and I accidentally shot someone because I rolled really terribly and I died. So it was a great first experience.
That's amazing.
I missed my shot and killed an innocent bystander. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it was just like I got like a nat 1. I didn't kill them actually, but like I just shot them in the shoulder because I missed who I was aiming at, and it was really funny because the way that Sean was doing it was sort of like he was really funny as a DM.
Yeah,
and so he made everything super hilarious. But I just made like a human ranger.
Yeah.
So, because I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing, because that was literally like my first exposure to like actually playing D&D. I've been interested for a while, but it's hard to like find resources on like intro stuff that isn't, because there's just so much information. It's easier for me to just play and figure it out and then do some research once I know the basics. And so that's kind of what I did, is I played with him. And then since then I've been learning a little bit more. And then it's been really nice to play with you and Reggie and actually be able to like make a real character with the full rule set, and just kind of figure out how to actually do it.
What do you feel like was your first like impression of D&D before you started playing?
Mm-hmm. My first like hearing about D&D and like all my experience before that one shot was from my brothers, actually, because they both played some individually, and I had never really, just like with people they knew, and I never really joined them, just because by the time I was like actually interested, they were kind of like on the downward train of like not playing it as often, just because they were busy, or like the person who was DMing for them was like doing something else at the time. So I never got to play with them, but I'd heard about it from them, and it always seemed like a lot of fun, because it's basically just like, it's just a fantasy game that doesn't require you to, buy. You don't have to buy anything really. You don't have to, like, you can get dice if you want, but most of the time someone there will have dice you can use.
Yeah.
So if you want to just like try it once, it's like pretty much free. And so it was like really enticing, because it was something I was potentially trying to do with my brothers. I haven't yet, but I want to. And yeah, low expense.
Yeah, no, it's one of the games where I'm like, you can definitely like spend as little as like, I mean, $0 if you use the D&D app, which I'm not a sponsor of, but I'm just saying it's literally $0 investment to, there are people who spend thousands of dollars on campaign setups with detailed buildings. Thinking about that and how D&D you know, is so connective. When do you feel like in the midst of our campaign, you kind of had that moment where you were like, hey, I get why people love this?
Either towards the end of our like the Lost Mines campaign, or when we were playing with Reggie's friends.
Yeah.
Because that's when I made a character that wasn't just a human ranger.
Yeah.
So it was my first time actually trying to role play as a sorcerer. And so that was as like a haughty, stuck up sorcerer. So that was a lot of fun. And I think that's where I really started to realize like how much fun it can be to like sort of take on a persona, not necessarily being like mean, but just being like, taking jabs at people to like, and it was just a lot of fun.
Yeah. So your first character was a ranger.
Yeah.
Your second character was a sorcerer.
Mm-hmm.
What was the name of your sorcerer? And can you maybe pick like a favorite moment that you had since you brought them up playing with them?
Yeah. So the name of my sorcerer is Niru Bahadur. And I kind of just found it randomly off of a, fantasy name generator.
Yeah.
Which was...
As we all do.
Yeah, as we all do. And so I just thought it sounded cool. And he's dragonborn. Mm-hmm. So he's a big dragonborn, but he's like very, like I said, very haughty and like very looks down on everyone, not because he like hates them. He just thinks he's smarter because usually he is. And so he's put in the work to become, one of the greatest sorcerers of all time. And so, according to him. And so he, looks down on people, and when he's surprised, he begrudgingly, admits when he's wrong and all of that. So it was really cool to like play with Reggie, who chose to pick a character that was not extremely smart. And so like, because he was playing, who was he playing for that game?
Mold.
He was playing, so it was sort of like a wrestling kind of character, inspired at least. And so he was like very, very much like a caricature of like not very smart, but very muscly and brawny. And so it was really nice to have that pairing of like me being able to look at him and be like, oh my gosh, what is this idiot doing?
Yeah.
And he loved it too. He loved playing into that role. And so it was really fun. I feel like that was some of my favorite moments of just like making our characters interact, either in battle, like mid battle, you'd be like, the smolder will, do this and thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why? So it was like a lot of fun to make our characters interact. I feel like that was one of the coolest things.
No, that's super cool. I love that you bring that up, and it makes me think about kind of what you were talking about earlier. With your brothers, do you feel like D&D is something that can really help you kind of get around the table, connect as a family, spend time together in an active way? And I know you're moving back to California. Do you have plans of doing that? What do you think that'll look like?
Yeah, I think it definitely could be if we decided to take the time and like carve out, a day, either like once a week or once a month or whatever, because they're both really busy now. I feel like if we did, it could be a lot of fun, and like it would definitely bring us together. I'm pretty close with my family because we were homeschooled.
Yeah.
So it's a bit easier for us to kind of just sit down and do things together than a lot of people. But I don't know if my sister would be super into it, but she'd probably join. Yeah. Because she likes doing stuff with us, whether she like necessarily enjoys the activity or not.
Yeah.
Growing up with 3 brothers, she kind of learned to enjoy spending time with people rather than the actual activity. And so as far as continuing as I move away, I definitely want to. And me and you have kind of figured out a way that we can do online sessions.
Yeah.
Potentially depending on my schedule and the time change of a couple hours and all of that. But it's actually not very hard. Even if we didn't decide to use like a program, we could easily just like do some sort of Discord call and have a camera that you would share, and then we just watch and you move our pieces for us. Back to the whole thing of like, for a very low budget, you can even do it online. I feel like it's so accessible and so just easy to start.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of Dungeons and Dragons, is that like even with your family, like even if there are people that don't have major buy-in to like, oh my God, I want to do this, or hey, I have like on end spreadsheets and notes of all of the characters that I'm constantly making. because like I talked to Reggie and he's like literally always making a new character. But it's one of those things where it's like your sister, your brother, even I've seen people's parents, like it's just easy. It's accessible to enter in. You don't have to be the biggest like dungeon nerd to hop on it. And it also doesn't always have to look like big high fantasy where it's like everyone's role playing medieval. And sometimes, I mean, I had a friend, he told me about a session where he actually got to play with his parents and his sister. And it wasn't very like, you know, they were role playing the entire time. But like his mom like just bursts into a room. She's playing an orc barbarian and she just like slaughters like basically the quest giver before anything had happened, just because like they wanted to see what they could do.
Yeah.
And finding that the joy, yes, it's in the story, yes, it's in the characters, but a lot of times it's just in the spending of the time together. I think that's something that, you know, we as a society and a culture just don't do as much anymore. We rarely have that time where we can just sit down at the table, talk about our daily lives, and really just like engage and have fun. And so it's one of those things where I think the beauty and the fun part about D&D is how accessible it really is. So were there moments where you're like, hey, I really love this character, and you didn't necessarily expect to, or like there's things that I'm now finding I'm starting to care about what my character says and does that really have gripped at your heartstrings as your own characters kind of evolved throughout the story?
Yeah. Not quite yet as far as Wraith the Ranger that I made goes, just because I made him without necessarily thinking about making a persona for him. It was mostly just me making a character that I would play as me so I can learn the rules. Yeah. So not as much yet. I'm going to try and like shift, not necessarily shift his character, but shift into more of a character when I play him next time. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. But with the sorcerer Niru, I feel like I kind of again back to like the getting into the role of like quipping whenever someone says something that I would deem that I as you know, a haughty sorcerer would deem as you know, a dumb question, or like if someone's like questioning my, you know, power or anything, I can, you know, give a haughty response. I actually had a list of funny quips that I would try and sneak in. I didn't get to say many of them.
No, but that's amazing.
But yeah, I had a little list that I had put together of like things, some funny things that I could say during battle before I cast like a powerful spell, or like is an introduction. It would be, you know, something along the lines of like, you know, yes, it's nice to meet me, or something like that, you know, or like, you know, I'm our only hope kind of thing. Like something along those lines where it's like, he's just super full of himself, but because he is confident. And so I feel like getting into that is a lot of fun, especially since that's not how I normally am as a person. And so it's really funny to do that, because then I can, you know, interact with people in a way I never have before. Yeah.
No, I think that's kind of the beauty of role playing. I was going to ask you though, do you think that some part of you is in that character? Because it's one of those characters where I'm like, maybe you're a little too good at looking down at the other characters. You know, sometimes I'm like, is this you role playing or is this intrusive thoughts coming out? But I'd say is a little bit part of you, but it's more of like an exaggeration or character.
Definitely, yeah. I would say there's definitely, I mean, everyone has those moments where it's like, you look at someone, you're like, did you really just say that? Yeah. Or like, you know, like those moments where it's like you said, an intrusive thought where like for a second you're like, what? And then you're like, oh, sorry, I can't say that out loud. And so that definitely can sometimes happen. And I do have a bit of like a quicker wit when it comes to like making a jab or a quip at someone in a fun way, because a lot of my friends enjoy that. And so that definitely helps to like fit into the character and like quickly, like right after someone says something, look at them and be like, why would you even do something like that? Yeah. Kind of thing, you know? And so, yeah. And what's funny is his voice, the voice that I do for Niru is basically just like the Grinch. Yeah. Because I couldn't think of any other voice that basically, I could do. I
think there's a little bit of Sean Connery in it, where it's kind of like 007 meets the Grinch, which I mean, that would be an interesting movie.
I
Um, but I think it's something that's fun, and I've actually loved getting to see you like kind of walk that out. So would you say that you typically go for more, or like when you're thinking about making a character? I know Naira is kind of like your second character, second or third character. Do you think more tragic backstory, or do you kind of want more of the chaotic neutral, like party gremlin that kind of does whatever they want?
I usually end up enjoying, theoretically, the chaotic neutral party gremlin kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just because I feel like it's the easiest to sort of slip into, for me, as far as like some other alternate ego. Miru was more of he didn't have a tragic backstory. It was mostly just he grew up as like not really a noble, but like well off, and learned, had access to like a vast sum of libraries, and just that's how he became like a hot. He looks down on people because they just don't know as much. With Wraith, my ranger, he definitely had a tragic backstory of like betrayal, trying to do the right thing and messing up, kind of thing. And then with the new character for the one shot we're about to do,
Yeah.
it's more of a neutral background, not necessarily tragic, but just hard life of a poor person trying to make money and become a sailor to pay off his debt, but longs to be free, kind of like sort of like a Treasure Planet kind of character, where it's like he's not necessarily good or bad, he just kind of is, and is trying to be free. So I feel like that'll be a lot of fun to play.
Oh, definitely. No, I think that's one of the most interesting things about D&D is you really get to kind of craft characters and explore just ideas or topics that you wouldn't normally get to. Do you feel like, the characters that you make, do you feel like it allows you to maybe touch on things that you wouldn't be able to talk about or necessarily be able to walk out because it doesn't happen to you in everyday life? Do you feel like your characters kind of give you the freedom to explore certain ideas or story tropes that, maybe you wouldn't personally, like you, the person, wouldn't necessarily love, but have had the opportunity to kind of role play and figure out at the table?
I feel like I haven't really made a character that would take advantage of something like that extremely well yet, just because I'm still figuring out what I like and what I'm capable of playing as far as a character goes.
Yeah.
I've sort of stuck in my wheelhouse of funny yet, can kind of take stuff seriously when he needs to kind of characters. But it definitely, especially with Miru, where it's more of a character that has almost nothing to do relating to me or like how I've, lived my life. It has definitely opened the opportunity to look more into that, but we also haven't had a whole lot of points in our sessions yet where we've dived into a lot into backstory yet. A little bit with Wraith, but also for him, he's more of just me. So it's hard to talk about stuff that like it's a lot of the stuff that is in his backstory I would just react to as me. So it's a little bit harder to like look at those from a different perspective. And then Nero doesn't really have anything in his past to bring up.
Yeah.
So
he had a fluffy, cushy look.
Yeah, he did. And so it definitely opens up that door. I just don't think I've crossed into it quite yet because I'm still getting comfortable with, slipping into another persona.
You've definitely grown a lot as a player. I think we've been playing for almost like 8 or 9 months now together.
Yeah.
What do you feel like were some of the kind of like the early on struggles of trying to get into role play, and what are some of the ways that you've kind of like helped you mentally overcome them?
Yeah. I feel like part of it was I've never had a like chance to role play really for anything. I never got into theater, partly just because my high school didn't offer anything theater-wise. I feel like I probably would have, because I enjoy the small, tidbits I've been able to, be exposed to it with like my friends being into it and stuff like that. So that makes it a little bit harder to try and learn all the little tricks on my own. But then also, I'm not really a person who like pretends a lot. like I have an active imagination, and I like get into things, but I don't do anything similar to roleplay in anything. Even in like video games that I play, I don't really answer like if there's like if it's a story heavy game, I'm not really going to role play as the character I've made. I'm gonna choose the options that I would choose. I had like never even tried to like really become my character until D&D, and so that was probably the weirdest thing. Is like I'm not just controlling a character; I'm becoming the character for a little bit.
Yeah.
And so that was hard to get over. And then it was with Wraith, like you mentioned, he's basically just me as a self insert, and so there was nothing to role play. And so that's why I feel like it was a lot of fun and really refreshing to play a class I normally don't choose for anything, which is Sorcerer, and then jump in with trying to do a voice, trying to do a completely different character. It was fun because we'd already had those lots of sessions where I hadn't been able to do that. And so I feel like it was actually a really good introduction of like not doing it, so then I can kind of know what I'm missing, so to speak, and then try to get into it by going kind of into the deep end of this really annoying almost character of Nero.
What would you say to someone like you who maybe is not the most animated at the get-go, but is curious about trying D&D, wants to, but is nervous about this role play thing? Because it can be intimidating if you're not used to it.
Yeah.
What would be the advice that you would give them?
I would probably say for your first character, role play as you. Like you can just literally respond to things how you would respond to them.
Yeah.
And just make a character that is yourself. Even if you change their character a little, like your character's personality a little bit later on, that's totally fine. There doesn't always need to be like a reason to change something about your character. You can do it just because, as long as you're like your DM and your people you're playing with are fine with it. Or GM, whatever you want to call it. Either one.
Yeah.
And so I would say definitely if like you don't want to start off, diving into a deep role play kind of character, then you could just do a little self-insert for a little bit until you get used to the game. And then you can kind of see, like I said before, what you're missing, so to speak, in the sense of like being able to react to things in an abnormal way to what you normally would. And it's a lot of fun too.
I feel like that's one of my favorite things about Dungeons and Dragons is that there is so much to learn about it, even though that can feel daunting.
Yeah.
But just as the characters themselves like grow in game, you as a person grows in game. You as a person gets more comfortable with the people that you're playing with the environment that you're in, the story that you're telling. And so it could totally make sense, essentially, for your character to be mostly you, to be mostly who you value and what you represent when it comes to how you play your character. And then over time, just as you would or I would in everyday life, as we grow as people, your character grows. And then you see that character kind of transform into something else. What do you feel like that's something that, not necessarily me, but as a DM or another player has done to kind of make it easier for you to open up and kind of, quip a little bit more, lean back and forth and go with the back and forth at the table?
Yeah. I'll use Reggie's character as an example because I've done the most sessions with him and his characters. The first character he chose, Eager, was pretty similar to the one I mentioned before, where it was like he was a half orc, half human, and so it was like not quite as like as dumb as you would think a normal orc would be, but like still like leaning in that direction of like not as smart, but big muscles make big things happen kind of thing. Kind of character.
Basically, I mean, it feels like, Reggie's obviously been on the podcast, but it feels like that tends to be his gimmick is every character he makes is a more muscular version of himself.
Which is saying something. Yeah. It's pretty big.
But we love him for that. It's great.
It's really awesome. And it's really cool to like, even with my Wraith character, to start like playing off of that a little bit. And like if he tries to do something and fails, like especially when it comes to like a perception check or like a investigation check, I'll kind of be like, fine, and then I'll step up and do it, whatever it is. And so it's really cool because like the Wraith character is more of a like, they're Wraith and Eager are much more of like brothers in the sense of they've grown close without like sort of acknowledging or like getting like sappy with each other. They kind of just trust each other, and they like know what needs to be done, and they've learned to like, you know, fight around each other more and just work together. And so it's really cool to be able to like get more comfortable with just like me taking point on certain things while he takes point on other things, just learning what each character is good at. And then a lot of those things are, you know, based off of random dice rolls, but it usually ironically plays into our characters.
Yeah.
Like him failing investigation checks and me failing, you know, strength checks kind of thing. And then with Niru and his character that I made for that one shot, which was the Smolder, very similar character as far as like, you know, flamboyant persona and like not the smartest, but just super strong. And I could really lean into the making fun of him or like talking down to him without being openly rude. I mean, his character, it kind of like flowing over his character's head.
Yeah.
But him as a person catching it so he can make it go over his character's head. It was a lot of fun to do that.
What would you say is the kind of energy that you like at the table? Would you say that you want it to be more serious? Do you want kind of the chaotic antics the entire time, or do you kind of want more of like a somewhere in between the epic moments but also those meaningful plot points along the
A lot of that obviously depends on the people you're with, but
of course
I feel like the DM can even just like sort of guide you to figure out, like to like hint at what, you know, the situations are to be like, and usually the players will pick up on that quickly. I feel like I prefer having sort of like the last option you said, where it's like the more mixed, where it's like you have those, you know, funny, you know, chill moments, but then as the story, you know, ebbs and flows, you get into those serious moments and get into those, you know, combat encounters where you're like thinking strategically and trying to like, you know, keep everyone alive and like sitting on the edge of your seat waiting to see how much damage the enemy's doing to you, see if they hit you and all of that. But then when the fight's over and you're trying to like either figure out a puzzle or just moving on to the next room or talking about what to do next, everyone's back into their weird, quirky, you know, funny, because that's how people would act. You know, it's like you focus up when you need to get something done, but when there's when there's not any danger anymore, you kind of just go back to your default, you know, personality of just like sort of making fun of each other a little bit, and like someone trying to give a suggestion, you're like, no, that was dumb. Please just don't suggest something like that again. Kind of thing.
You're now 9, maybe 10 months in. We might hit a year in the next few months.
Yeah.
What would you say is your favorite part of the game?
I think the combat. I would have to say combat.
Combat.
Yeah.
Both you and Reggie said combat.
Yeah. Because what I love about D&D is it's essentially an MMO that I get to actually do what I want to.
Yeah.
And so I absolutely love MMOs.
I'll certainly try.
Yeah. Famous phrase. And so I feel like I do really love MMOs and like playing them, but it's really hard to convince a group of people to play consistently.
Most definitely.
And it's partly because you're spending $30 to $60 to play a game that you might play for a month and then decide, you know, I don't want to get to the end game, or I don't like how they've, you know, made in-game dungeons or raids or things like that. It's really hard to get into MMOs, especially I'm not a huge fan of subscription-based, you know, MMOs like WoW or Final Fantasy. I love the games. I just don't like the idea of, I want to be able to take a break without feeling bad about, I'm for my money, you know? And so, I mean, I could always just cancel it, but then it's a hassle and blah, 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 blah. It's way easier to just play D and like get some people together and be like, hey, we'll play once a month for a couple hours. And it's way easier to just jump in and out than for a normal MMO. And going into combat with that, it's really nice to be able to, I feel like I have more control over when and how I use abilities. I don't have to min-max and worry about timers and everything like that. It's per turn. And it's really nice to be able to do it that way because it's a very different style and pacing, but I like it.
Yeah. No, I think it's one of those things where because it's so customizable and you can kind of decide whatever you want to do, you really put especially even with combat, I mean with role-playing, but almost everything in the game, it gets put back on the players, how they interpret it, how it get walked out. And then even sometimes it falls on the DM to allow things that normally wouldn't normally be allowed to kind of play out at the table. I think it definitely lends itself to being more creative in the sense of like you can't necessarily change an MMO on the spot. Like
Yeah.
you can't change your class or your build or your abilities. Where with Dungeons and Dragons, we can partner, we can write something together, we can
Yeah.
even, sometimes what we call like the flavor of this will look like X, but we're still casting Guiding Bolt, or we're still using like Healing Word.
Yeah.
We're using the same spells, but to make it make sense for story, or even just making combat more enjoyable, we'll modify what it looks like in game and how it's being told in game. I'm gonna ask this: what do you feel like is the harder parts of D&D? The things that you don't necessarily love as much?
Mm-hmm. I would say as of right now, there's not a whole lot I found where I'm like, I don't like that. I feel like the hardest part for me is in those points where it's a lot more of just not to dig on you, where it's more you explaining things.
Yeah.
I find it hard to just kind of sit there and listen and actually like soak in the information.
No.
That's why I have a notebook that I try and write down things sometimes, but I haven't been.
Yeah. DMs. Be shorter. Less words is always better. If you can tell the story with less words, I think it's valuable. And I think it's real. I was going to actually follow up and say, what are the moments that make you go to grab your phone because you're not, able to focus, or you feel like there's a lull in the game? But it's real. I've been at tables where I'm like, I don't really dislike this moment, but I'm not really engaged in the moment. And so it becomes that thing of like, not necessarily, can we get to the next thing already?
Yeah.
But like, how is this moving the plot forward?
Usually what'll happen for me in those, when I get to those moments, is it's when you're trying to describe as we walk into a new room and there's just a lot of things that you want us to notice without having to do like checks or anything like that, or you're having to describe, a bunch of NPCs interacting.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily information that I need to remember, but it's just story, like how characters interact with each other. And I'm like, I'm not really participating in the conversation at the moment just because my character wouldn't. So I'm kind of just sitting there waiting for them to be done.
Totally get that.
And
yeah.
There's not really a way to avoid that sometimes, just because, there's interactions between NPCs that would happen in a story and your character might not pay attention in real life if it was happening. And so,
No, but I think that's totally valid.
Yeah.
What would maybe your advice be for DMs, to be a little more interactive, involve the players more in those moments?
I would say maybe, depending on how you want to like run a campaign and make how much you want to have the party members be like the heroes, quote unquote, you could make them maybe like make the NPCs rely on them more for like, and like not necessarily any decision, but like, and try to involve them more in a conversation. Like, oh, you're a hero. You help us decide. Like,
yeah.
Oh, we've heard of your your fame and everything. You fix the situation.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Where they like, rather than them doing normal day-to-day squabbles, being like, they can start that conversation and be like, wait a minute, he's here. Have him fix it. He can fix things, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's totally valid. I would say something I learned in Yell's campaign is one, too many NPCs can be the death of your story, where it's like you need them because you need someone to essentially evolve the characters. But literally, there was a few times where I was acting out 5 people, and it's like,
and they're interacting with each other,
and it's just me talking to myself, and I was like, I've bit off way too much more than I can chew. But I think that's valuable. I think interacting the players, and then something that I wanted to ask you about, because it's something I haven't talked about at the table, but I think it's super relevant. Do you think it's more effective to, describe the room to as best as your ability? Or would you be a player who's more open to like, give me a feel of the room and I'll explore and find out what's in the room?
I think if it's a non-combat encounter, it's better to not explain as much. And then we can like be like, well, is this here? Or like, can I go look at this? Or like maybe describe like a couple key features that you'd want someone to go look into. And then as they say like, oh, I want to go look at that, then it's sort of like a fog of war kind of thing, where as you move forward, more is described.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to open up the entire room at once. If it's combat, I would rather know more about the terrain maybe beforehand. And what can help is like if you draw things on a board sometimes.
Yeah.
Or like if you don't have a board, then it would probably be like describe a little bit more of like terrain. Or like these guys have the high ground. There might be a way to get to them if you want to like sneak up on them if you're a rogue kind of thing. So I think for combat, it would be more helpful to me if I had a little bit more descriptors of the terrain. But for non-combat encounters, explaining as we go is probably a little bit more helpful for me.
No, I think that's super valid. I think one of the struggles that many DMs, and I'm sure many DMs out there that are listening can attest to, is the overwhelming desire to prep and prep a lot. And I mean, I've talked to some guys that are like, yeah, I put 8 hours into this session and they've destroyed all of it. And so it's like one of those things where learning that balance, and something that hopefully I've changed and gotten a little bit better at, but it's one of those things of learning that balance of how much do I actually need to prep and how much can I let just be, you know, the characters are role playing, the people at the table are role playing, y'all guys are all improving. How much can I improvise on the spot, on the fly? Online's it's been a little bit more challenging trying to figure out what it's going to look like. Because I have to have prep scenes and prepped maps.
Yeah, that takes a little bit more.
But I think in general, if I mainly prep combat and then focus on letting the more exploratory parts, the more like, hey, you guys are trying to figure out what's going on in this area, in this room, be more off the cuff and less prepared. Meaning, like, I know what's supposed to happen in the scene. I know what the main bullet points are, but I don't know what the actual, like, I don't know what the characters are going to say. It's just going to go based off of what the characters go. I've been finding that looking for a way of storytelling that is both pre-planned and improv is been lending to more enjoyable sessions. And I think it's kind of not choosing to not plan, but planning the things that matter. Like, obviously you need to know the combat encounters. You need to know what your boss fight does. Because, I mean, we had that one Back to the Future one shot, and a lot of it was improv, but the parts where we had combat, even with the Biff Buchanan boss fight, that, was probably my favorite D&D session I've run so far. Like, having something like the tremendous wall or the tiny hand slam, as prepared content made it so that, like, I knew this was going to happen. I just didn't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, kind of shifting a little bit, but why do you think that this game engages so many people? Like, why do you think it's becoming so much more popular?
I think part of it is the appeal of not having to be, like, being just more accessible than, like, something like a video game would be. And someone who, wouldn't like, playing games, or, like, doesn't have, a console or a nice enough PC, quote unquote.
Yeah.
It's way easier for more people to get into D&D. And it's ironically less of a time commitment than a lot of video games that would fit into a similar genre of fantasy. It's more time per session usually, but it's way more relaxed as far as how often you do those, because you can get the same amount of content but spread it out over, like, years that you could from a game that you'd have to spend, like, 4 hours at least per session to feel like you've made progress, kind of like, and, like, you have to do that, like, in a week, because, like, oftentimes with games they'll do, like, resets, or, like, things will update weekly, and so it feels like you have to be there weekly, and part of that's to keep their player counts up and all that. But with D&D, you can do a session, take a break for a couple months, come back to it, and you might not remember all the details of, like, the story or whatever, but it's way easier to just jump back in and just play again. And I feel like that has a huge appeal of just being able to, like, now I feel like playing, and you can kind of just jump into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think about even, like, the comparison to video games. I can't tell you how many times I play a game and then because I can't keep up with the DLC or the next thing that
Yeah.
drops, I'm not able to engage with it. And then a lot of times, like, you got to keep paying
Yeah.
for the cost of the game.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that D&D gives players that maybe other hobbies don't?
Uh-huh. I think there's very few hobbies that make you feel like you've gone and done something without having to move.
Yeah.
And like without actually having a hobby of going hiking and exploring, it feels like you can go explore somewhere, go, you know, feel like you can just be an overpowered, mage or like a super cool shifty ranger or rogue, or be like, this big bruiser of a barbarian.
Yeah.
And just go around and like cause organized havoc in a bunch of different towns and, goblin bases, and, fool up some assassins and wreck their plans and all that kind of thing. I feel like there's very few hobbies that can make you feel accomplishment for such little work as a player. As a DM, there's a lot more that goes into it. But as a player, like, I have a lot of different random hobbies. I play music. I dabble in 3D printing, so I just make random, things. I've made a few props. I haven't painted them yet, but I've tried to do that, and there's a lot more work involved in that and I haven't gotten to the payout part yet, where I like have an actual finished painted, like accurate to whatever degree I decide prop that I've made. And so I haven't really even had a payout yet for 3D printing, and I've been doing it for years.
Yeah.
And so it's different to be able to just sit down, spend 4 hours doing this, and then at the end of it feel like, yeah, we did something and we accomplished something in just a couple hours.
No, I think it's one of my favorite things, is that the story unfolds as we go. And regardless of the decisions that we make, it just keeps happening. Like, you're going to go on a journey. I think of that, like the Bilbo Baggins meme that everyone shares online, like, I'm going on an adventure.
Yeah.
It really is an adventure. It's something that you're doing every week. And then I'm just going to give like a small plug, but like, you made this.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, you made this awesome AirDnD dice tower.
Yeah.
That I'm like, it does pay off, and you did make something. So, and I'm super thankful that you made that. And I actually really love it. And I think it's one of those things where, like D&D, sometimes you never know. We're making stuff like this, 3D printing in the future, where it's going to lead you. So if someone says like, hey, I'm more reserved, I'm too quiet for D&D, what would be something that you would tell them?
Kind of similar to what I said before. If you really want to get into it, but don't want to try and role play or make a character that you would like, you are uncomfortable trying to like play, at least, or you're not comfortable with the people that you're playing with yet, make a character that is you. If you're like a very quiet, like almost say nothing ever kind of person, make like either like a ranger, a rogue, or like maybe like you could even do like a goblin rogue that just doesn't say a whole lot and kind of just like always sits in the corner and is like,
yeah.
And like, or you could even sort of like a Groot kind of character. You can make a big hulking barbarian who says like one word every session, or like you could even make it a challenge where like he only says a certain amount of words per sentence or something like that.
Yeah.
So like there's a lot of different ways you could do it. I feel like if you don't say much or you don't react verbally to things by default, make a character that leans into that. There was a video you sent me where it's like, it was the one where it was like, try and figure out when you're making a character, you don't have to have like, when you're making, sorry, let me try again. When you're doing the backstory for a character, you don't have to have the ending of his like story figured out yet. You could leave it like halfway through, and like you don't know what his what your character's like formative moment is yet, and that could happen during a session. And so maybe you could start off with a character that is like super quiet because they don't trust people because of something that happened in the past, whatever, and then like leave it at that. And as the sessions go on and as you get more comfortable, you could write the story of your character as they become more comfortable and start to trust the people around them, and then that can change, their character a little bit, and that makes it easier for you to maybe try and make them more of a character that you can role play, and it has a explanation in the story of the character, which is fun.
What would you say is something that you've learned since playing D&D about yourself that you feel like D&D has kind of taught you?
I've learned that I really enjoy. It's almost like I really enjoy making a new character that is something I would not normally do.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like a puzzle or a problem to solve that isn't annoying, like math or anything like that. It's a problem that is fun to solve because once you solve it, you just get to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt with Niru, my sorcerer, because the first time I made a sorcerer, I had to make him level 5 because for that it was for the Back to the Future one shot that you did, and so he had to be level 5. And so I was like, I know absolutely nothing about sorcerer, but I want to try it. And it was a lot of fun to figure out how a sorcerer works. And then I was able to learn, sort of build the personality of my character around figuring out how a sorcerer works. And it's extremely complicated to try and figure out all at once without leveling up from 1 to 2 to 3 and all of that. It took me a while to get a handle on it, and there's some things I still don't quite understand. But that sort of was, I think, part of the inspiration for making him a little bit more stuck up and haughty, because it's like he's put in the work to learn all of this, and other people haven't, so that they must be not as good as me, kind of thing. And so I feel like it's been a lot of fun to try and step out of my comfort zone without actually being uncomfortable, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I'm able to do something abnormal to me without there being any risk involved. And sometimes it can feel like there still is a risk, but if you're playing with people you're comfortable with, then there's not really any risk to it, because you're not putting anything on the line. You're not actually trying. You're not actually doing anything new per se. You're just trying to. You're still trying to do something. I don't know. It's really hard to explain.
Yeah,
but it's almost like a risk-free risk.
No, I think that it's kind of, I mean, that's what mainly our podcast is about. That's what the ebook that I'm coming out with is about, is that the tone that we set at the table, the way that we play should reflect the values of the people at the table. And so in my mind, we haven't talked much about it this episode of the podcast, but the idea of PG play is not to be this limiting thing that is a kiddie version of D&D, but it's something to where you create an environment where you feel comfortable to take that risk, to do something weird, to, maybe play a character that's outside of what you would normally think to do, in an environment where you feel like there's guardrails and there's safety, and that the people at your table reflect the values that you have, and that we have an agreed upon system of things that we care about, we think are important when it comes to D&D. And that's what we're going to try to have be at the table. I think it's definitely one of the best parts of D&D is when you find a group of people that love to go somewhere, that want to go on an adventure and explore, worlds unknown and play with its different characters. We together get to go somewhere. And I think that's kind of the magic of Dungeons and Dragons, is we get to go somewhere together. It's not, yes, it's about the nat 20 rolls and the crits that for some reason Reggie seems to get every week. And it's not about the funny characters or, Snaggle the goblin who y'all carry around the nugget on your back. That's basic. Yeah, those are part of it. But the magic of it, I think, is going together. It's playing together. And so I think that's something that adds just so much value. And I think I've seen it in you where you're more comfortable to open up. And obviously you got to know me and Reggie more as we've played together. But I think having that place where we can go further together and tell something that is not only just fun, but engaging, I think it's worth it. I think it's touching on something that we don't do anymore, which is imagination, having that childlike space where we get to live in worlds and stories and books that, you know, a lot of us with adult 9-to-5 jobs kind of have to put aside. But D&D's like, no, like let's hop into this.
Exactly.
So I'm going to ask you this. Are there any questions, or is there anything that you have been curious about that you kind of want to explore more in the world of D&D?
Yeah. I think one thing I've been interested in as I get more comfortable creating characters is creating a character based off a already existing fictional character that I enjoy, whether that's from an anime, from a show, from a movie, whatever. You know, like I've been some of them are obviously going to be a lot easier than others, but there's this one character from an anime called Jujutsu Kaisen. Yeah, it's Megumi Fushiguro, and a lot of what he does is summon familiars. Basically, is what it is.
Yeah,
but they're made out of like shadows. And so I was thinking, like, what would be a way I could do something like that? So it'd obviously be some sort of like, you know, beast summoning thing.
Yeah.
So I was literally thinking about it right before we started this. I was like, it might be some sort of like maybe druid character or something like that, or maybe even into some sort of a like quote unquote necromancer, as in necromancer in function as far as rules of D&D. Yeah, but then basically reskin it and make it look how I want to.
Yeah. I think even, I mean, in my mind, if you're wanting to do, depending on the type of combat you want to do, you could reskin a druid, but also have that druid be proficient in melee combat. Instead of summoning like one animal, you can just split the animals into 3 and break up the health for the animal between 3 characters. Now, it does give you more like action economy, but those are things where I'm like, taking those characters to life and making them a part of the story in a sense of like reskinning them, changing them, modifying them because it's a beloved character. I think it's totally doable. I think it's one of those things. I did it with a character that is extremely overpowered, that would probably not fit in a traditional. I mean, they fit thematically in D&D, but like essentially, I took one of my favorite MMO bosses of all time and made him into a D&D character that I played, and so I took the Lich King and having to modify the Lich King in a way where it's like he still has his. And it wasn't actually the Lich King, but it was a recreated character story-wise, but has the ability and the power of the Lich King, but is not essentially a dungeon boss walking around smacking every single group of enemies that we encountered. Was fun. And there were things where feat-wise, like I was able to story-wise, it made sense that my character could do this, but combat-wise, maybe there was a reason we didn't explore that. But no, I think totally. Bringing characters to life on the screen. I mean, there's multiple characters that I think fit into D&D, and most of my characters when I get to play now are usually like, how can I play as Luke Skywalker, or how can I play as Aang from Avatar: The Last Airbender, or how can I make an Uncle Iroh character that is like this chubby kind of like bard, but also is like a monk who's gonna also do like fire bending, but is also like really epic.
Bard, sort of,
barbarian, exactly.
Rogue wizard.
And there's ways, but a lot of it, I think it comes down to reflavoring stuff, reskinning things, taking pre-made abilities like druid abilities, druid familiars, or even in my case, like with Uncle Iroh, taking some of the already preset monk stuff and maybe making it visually look different, but physically do the same amount of damage. I think it totally is possible.
Yeah. And with certain characters that have really wacky abilities, like a lot of the Jujutsu Kaisen characters, that's going to be something you're going to have to talk through with like your DM and figure out logistically how that would work.
Yeah, but I think like you could totally play it.
Yeah. And there's some that would be super easy. Like Maki. She's someone who can't use like what they call cursed energy, which is like their sort of like magic system, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And so she literally has to like, she just uses weapons that are like pre-powered up for her.
Yeah.
Basically, and that would just be essentially a normal character.
Yeah.
So there's some things that would be like a super easy translation if you wanted to just like insert a character from a show, and then there's things that'd be a lot more complicated, like trying to add, Megami or Gojo or something.
Totally. No, I mean, I thought of it, I thought of adapting, because I had some friends who were wanting to do like a magic school, like campaign.
That could be fun.
And I was going to copy Black Clover because I thought of the idea of having, not necessarily the exact same character, but the idea of having a main character whose magic power is they have no magic power would be super cool to really like have play out, and basically have like someone who's like, hey, my magic is that I can physically beat the
Yeah.
That's what my superpower is.
Make
or
his pencil disappear.
Yeah, literally, I can make this the John Wick character. But I've seen it's like you can make John Wick in D&D. You can make so many, and a lot of times I'll say that like as a DM, when I prep villains, I try to think about things like that, or because I want to be more improvised, I want to be more on the fly. I look for ways that I can adapt a villain. So maybe it's Darth Vader, but we'll make it a female villain. And instead of having, a son that that turns her to the light side, maybe it's something else that motivates her. Or maybe there is no motivation. Maybe she just stays in the dark side, stays that evil villain-like character. But I think it's one of those things where the more characters, the more stories that we get inspired by, the more we can improv that stuff at the table. And I'm a big person who's like, the things that make D&D more enjoyable is just being someone who is, whether they're a DM or they're a player, they're telling stories at the table. And that's kind of their thing.
Yeah.
But do you feel like there's any other questions that you might have?
We talked about this a little bit right before we started, but like when I was doing my my research, so to speak, into like how to like create a sorcerer character and like what all the abilities do and all of that. And as I looked into Rogue a little bit to try and understand how sneak attack works too, just to understand it more. And the general consensus, as you people just go through, what you get at each level or whatever. The general consensus is most people don't go past like between level 6 and 10 is usually when people stop leveling up their characters. And I found that interesting because it goes up to level 20, right? And so I was kind of wondering like, why is that? And something that kind of came up again in a couple of different videos was like, the fact that once you get up to those levels, you kind of just either have to add more enemies or make each of them a bullet sponge. And so I was like, besides that, is there like reasons why people usually don't go past like levels like 10-ish? And like, how would you navigate trying to make something with people that are that overpowered?
Yeah.
Make it interesting still. Like, would you switch to more story, puzzle driven, or like, how would you do that?
I think there's 2, maybe 3 things. But the first thing I think of off the bat is building characters level 1 to about 10 to 12 is probably the most accessible time-wise.
And the most fun.
Yeah, they tend to be more fun. You can still get that full hero's journey arc through your character.
For sure.
But for most people, when you're thinking about playing level 15 to level 20 combat and storytelling, it's not as accessible as mainline D&D, just because there's a sheer amount of information that you just have to know about your character, and that the DM has to know about your character before you can go into those type of combat and go into those type of situations.
Like niche traits and stuff that come up at like level 15, 16.
Because you're hitting ridiculous damage. You have multiple different feats, multiple different spells. And so for the average person who works 40 hours a week, they may not have that massive time investment.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it could be a struggle to put in all the time to learn one character. And I'll also say this, people tend to be like, I want to make a character, and then want to try a new character. Yeah. It's kind of like people hop around a lot. The second is, I think you can go on 2 approaches. I run into this a little bit with our group, just because we have been running a slightly smaller group.
Yeah.
Is that like, if you have really high level spells or attacks, the damage is going to be insane. So you've got to create either two things: really beefy, like really chunky, like fat NPCs that can just take massive hits of damage.
Yeah.
Or you need to create essentially trash that your group can just remove from the battlefield and then have an epic boss that is essentially bringing that high threat of damage. And then by either story or just the sheer amount of damage and or health that that boss has the skill essentially to prolong combat, prolong the story, have an immediate escape.
Yeah.
But I think it comes down to mastery at the end of the day. Like, I think, yes, people avoid it. I've heard jokes, it's scary to fight at that type of level.
Yeah.
But I think it's at the end of the day where it's like it tends to be for more veteran, more experienced players. There's less of an entry for it's really hard for someone who's never played D&D to learn a character with 20 plus spells.
Yeah. Yeah. I was definitely thinking more along of people who've leveled up, with that one character. Jumping in at level 20 would be insane. I can't imagine trying to figure out, even if you're familiar with the class.
Yeah.
Just all the little random things, like the random traits or the random attribute bonuses. Luckily, in D&D Beyond, it would track all of that if you just leveled up to level 20 and choose your options that it gives you. While that is limiting a little bit, there's still so many options. And for me, as someone who's still getting used to creating characters, I definitely use D&D Beyond as a guideline for knowing what I can and cannot do. And then there's, the DM can also give you special weapons, do have different bonuses or special abilities. So there's things that you can do outside of just leveling up again to spice up combat and spice up encounters.
No, but I think it's totally reasonable, to play at that level.
Yeah.
I just think you got to have the right players.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to really put the time, and I think it's a time investment.
Yeah.
If you want to have one character go from level 1 to level 20,
it's so long.
It's long. I mean, you could do it really short. I mean, I'm not saying you can't do it short. I've heard of people doing it in 2 years, and that's great.
Yeah.
But I feel like you lose out on so much of the journey of your character, and I think that's what makes D&D fun. The idea in my mind, and this is kind of how I view leveling, is that, one, I want leveling to feel like it's a reward. I accomplished something, therefore I leveled up. And then 2, it's okay, when things like combat becomes more mundane, my character's been kind of the same for a while, it gives us incentive to buy back in. I want to play the character because I want to try something new with new abilities, new skill sets. So I think it's possible, but I would say it's if you can get the right group of people together to do level 1 to 20, I think over the course of 4, maybe 5 years, you could have a really enjoyable experience in story. But I think the crux of the problem is there are DMs who love to tell stories, but it takes almost like a George R.R. Martin Tolkien mind to write a 5-year campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where I would say it is possible, but it's definitely more of a challenge for both the DM and for the players to go that far.
Yeah. And what you mentioned before, it's by the time you get to level 6 to 10, you're usually ending a normal sized campaign anyways. And so that usually is a good point to either be we can move on with these characters, or we can just, do something new, or even we've done, do a couple one-shots in between to take a break, try some new characters, try out new things. And then by the time you're done with those couple one-shots, you're ready to dive back into your higher level character with his fun little niche things. I just changed my ranger to be from just a ranger to a ranger rogue. And so that'll be a lot of fun once we actually dive back into that story of been going again more long-term with Wraith with that character, doing the bonuses of Colossus Slayer with sneak attack and adding 4 or 5 dice rolls to each attack with my knives that I have, and then he's probably gonna use a bow again, huh? Because you said you're gonna we're gonna not have the crossbow
Probably
because it was a
not.
special item.
Yeah, no, we'll do probably no special items for the new campaign
Yeah.
yet, so we can have some rewards in the upcoming. But with that campaign, my goal is to be around level 15 to 16 when we end it. So hopefully, we'll get into some high level combat that's really fun, really rewarding. And then the cool thing about it now that you're dual classing, and I think Reggie might be dual classing, we'll really get to see how multi-classing can kind of give you more creative flair, not only just spell-wise, but story-wise.
Yes. I actually have a question that I just thought of now.
Yeah.
When you level up and you're dual classing, do you choose a class to level up in, or do you if you level up, do both classes level up by 1? Or do you have to choose from each class what you level up when?
So you would pick per level.
Okay, yeah.
So right now you're at level 6. So you have 3 levels in Rogue, and then you have 3 levels in Ranger. And so when you level up, you would then decide, hey, I'm either going to take another level in Ranger, or I'm going to take another level in Rogue. It kind of depends on what you would get in that next level.
Yeah.
Sometimes with Ranger, or I think I'll have this more with Warrior. Warriors tend to get more feats.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's more advantageous to take, 4 levels in Warrior and 2 levels in Barbarian, because you want to rage, but you want to have the extra attacks. You want to have the extra feats. Balancing and knowing at what level. And then with multi-classing, there are certain class specific things, and you'll see this more with mage or magic based classes, where spell levels go up regardless if you're a sorcerer or if you're a wizard or a druid.
So yeah, I was still I would get more high level spell slots regardless of which one I choose.
Yes, but depending on the choice of the spells would be what would match.
Okay, cool. That makes sense.
But yeah, I've really loved having you on today.
Oh yeah.
I want to give a huge thanks to you, Andrew, not just for being here, but I think just for showing up and playing each week with me. I've really enjoyed playing with you, getting to know you. Obviously, I feel like Reggie tends to come in more loud, and some players like you, I feel come in more quiet, but I've really enjoyed just watching you grow over the past few months. But I think the main thing is everyone brings something that makes the table better.
Yes.
And so this is AirDnD. If you're wondering whether your voice belongs at the table, it definitely does. We'll see you guys next time.